Good morning all, and welcome to a new series of recruitment discussions with the Jump team. You'll be pleased to know that Mr. Jacobs arrived at 10:59 asking, and what are the questions? Obviously he's well prepared for today, so please give him some leeway. He has been away for a week, but there you go. As we're now at the halfway point of 2002, where has the time gone? We need that lazy eye focusing on 2023, and we need to be thinking about building our teams, and that means building a high performance team so we can enter 2023 all guns blazing, keep the momentum really high, even if there's a potential turbulent market ahead from there. So Harvard Business Review in 2021 examined what high performance teams do differently, and the 5 headlines they came out with was: high performance teams are not afraid to pick up the phone, high performance teams are more strategic with their meetings, high performance teams invest time bonding over non-work topics, high performance teams give and receive appreciation more frequently, and high performance teams are more authentic at work. So some of the things that we've got to sort of make a high performance teams were about the efficiency of communication. Communication, when it's efficient, is 4 times higher when it comes to retention. 41% of teams who are aware of their strengths show less absenteeism. Recognizing quality of work and achievement of groups increased profitability by 29%, and diverse teams outperformed homogeneous teams. Didn't tell me by how much, but they outperform homogeneous teams. Okay, almost half of underperforming teams, 49%, recognize that they need to pay more attention to the measures and processes to secure more business, while 3 in 110 senior executives and managers admit that they need more performance measures because they're not performing enough. And here was a really interesting sort of view on the traits of high performing teams, and it reviewed these traits quite strongly, and then it put it into average companies, small companies, mid-sized companies, and large companies. And the traits were: have a strong sense of direction and purpose, have a clear milestone to gauge achievement, define what's innovative in need innovation in need of a wider organization, defines how the organization can implement innovation, works flexibility in order to meet demand, demonstrates sense of camaraderie and togetherness, communicates frequently, daily or weekly, and keeps commitments, does what it says when it's going to do it. And what was quite interesting, small companies came out hugely on top of every other company. In fact, they came out in the top in 6 out of those 8 categories, where then it was followed by mid-sized companies, then average companies, and the last that were great at building high-performing teams were the large companies. And again, I'll post that in there so you can find that from there. So what the study revealed was encapsulated in the 3 following points. Evidence suggests that there are high-performance teams which are more productive and have more satisfied members. These teams have more common characteristics which allow practitioners to predict what the teams will perform like and find better people for that team. And all teams can be converted into a high-performance version if key factors can be developed and trained within their members. So an awful lot to sort of think about. So this week, joined by Dave and Hannah, and obviously Paul, as he's back from holiday. So let's kick off with the questions. Paul, I'm not going to ask you the first question because obviously you've got no clue what it is, but there you go. So why is it important for a leader to start to prepare, get that, Paul, start to prepare their team to perform better in a market of varied opportunity?
Great question, Howard. We all sat in silence. Well, I think that some of your data really tells us everything we need to know. It's fascinating to hear. I always love your openings, Howard, with all of your data points. It's always a great place to start. And you've shared it in the chat as well. Brilliant, because I'm sure a lot of people listening will be interested in that too. what I found fascinating, particularly linked to this question, is that idea that small businesses are the ones getting this right, that's really encouraging, isn't it, that small businesses are getting this right. And for me, it's about that. Why is it important for us to start to prepare better? Because we've got varied opportunity coming about. It's because it has a much bigger impact on our smaller organizations, doesn't it? Our move between really booming markets and more challenging markets has potentially bigger impact in a smaller organization. We've got less cushion, haven't we? But also we've often got better managers and more effective managers. Dave, I don't know if you want to leap in here and pick up anything from our talk yesterday with the REC.
Yeah, we did an REC business growth, part of their business growth series, and we had this as one of the topics yesterday. I think the size and the agility that smaller businesses possess really do give us an advantage. So if we are leaders of small businesses, then we should be on our toes, ready to move quickly, to prepare for whatever's to come. Upturn, whether the market gets more challenging or different is often the way, rather than challenging, because we have the agility to do that. I remember going from running a small business to being part of an enormous business. And I remember sitting in a board meeting being very frustrated because we came up with this really good idea. And the chief exec of the company said, "That's fantastic. Go away, do some thinking about it. Come back next month with a report. We'll analyze the report. And then the following month, I think we'll be ready to go." And I was sitting there thinking, hold on, about 10 weeks ago, I worked for a company that we would make decisions when we had a cup of coffee and think, that's a good idea. Why don't we do that? I think we're a little bit more mature now. We would test that. But the point is, the agility that smaller companies have mean that we can. And we should be talking to all our staff about, hey, this is coming along. This may be changing. This is what you've got to do. And to all of those points from Harvard Business Review, Howard, those excellent stats you gave, they're all the reasons why we should be doing it.
I mean, sorry, Con, how do you first?
I was just going to say, have you caught up, Mr. Jacobs?
This is now the third pop.
We're going to do this all the way through, the whole 45 minutes, Paul.
I'm just above all this. I'm not prepared to get into this slang business. I mean, I just pick up on what Heather or Hannah, I think you called her actually.
Yeah, Hannah.
Yeah, Hannah Solway, who I must be a sister, must be a twin sister. So what Hannah and Dave said, I would back up. I think, smaller businesses are always much more agile, nimble, capable of making quick decisions, moving quickly in the right directions. And I think that we proved all of that when we moved into the lockdown, which was pretty terrifying for so many businesses. But there are many, many companies that we work with that have emerged from that extraordinary moment, extraordinary time, in a stronger position now than they were pre-COVID. They survived it. They learned to move quickly, think quickly, act quickly. My sense for what's coming is that although nobody's necessarily excited at the prospect of a recessionary climate, there is a sense of confidence that whatever comes is something that can be coped with. I think the point about how we manage our people, how we prepare them for what may be coming, is a tricky one. On the one hand, we need to be anticipating potential changes in the market. And, you'd have to be living in a cave, frankly, not to be aware of what people are talking around regarding the winter period. And there's a whole list of things that could impact the market as we start moving into November and onwards. We don't want to spook our people. We don't want to frighten them. Many of them have actually gone through the COVID position, are feeling a lot stronger mentally than they did before the COVID situation. So hopefully they're not going to be too spooked, but we don't want to frighten people, make out that it's going to be, we're all going to hell in a handcart. At the same time, I think there's a pinch of reality here that people need to be aware of. So finding the right language to explain what we believe may come in our direction is going to be very important. Getting people on board and thinking about what is potentially coming in our direction in the next 4 to 6 months is important. I think what we've got to do, and what we've alluded to here, is start doing the hard work now, preparing our teams and getting out, particularly in front of clients over the next 4 months, 4 or 5 months, in advance of the winter period, to make sure that we're securing relationships, that we're well aware of our clients' needs, our clients' concerns before we hit that winter period, rather than wait until we get to that point.
So
Those sort of things are very important.
So to encapsulate all of that, the way I looked at this question was very simply, was that what you mentioned there, Paul, about when we broke into, or when lockdown sort of first came about and we stood there, we thought about what should we do. And one of the things we said we should be doing is training of the staff, just in case. We ran a training course every week. And it's interesting the amount of people who've come back to me and said, that kept us really laser sharp. And what it actually did was increase our capabilities to reapproach the market, even though there was changes to the market and changes coming. And that comment about it, varied opportunities, whether the opportunities go up or the opportunities stay the same or the opportunities goes down, we've got to prepare our teams to perform better. And that word communication, therefore, comes into it, and how we communicate with our teams and what we're going to do to make them perform better is really important. And we all know, because we're all long in the tooth and we've seen a number of sort of potential downturns in our times. So what's the first thing you'd address if we start to head towards a slowdown? Because I don't think a downturn is going to be too much, but I think we're going to head towards a slowdown. What's the first thing you'd address when we start to head towards that point?
There is something about attitudinal thing, isn't there? And I think that is what Paul was referring to as well, with that, in terms of the language we use. This is a changing market, and there's some good data from the REC. There's the data you're showing. There's some really odd things going on that are just not the way we've normally seen slowdowns of the market. And so I don't think we can predict what's going to happen. And so sometimes with salespeople, we've all seen it. You say, oh, the market's really difficult, and it changes your mindset and your positivity about how well you can do in the market. And I do think we have to be really careful with the language that we use when we're talking to our teams, because actually, in such a candidate short market, this is a market where there is terrific opportunity for us as talent acquisition specialists, because so many of our clients still need staff, even if the economy is slowing. And the data today from the REC says that people's faith in the economy is sliding far quicker than it's sliding than their faith in their own businesses and their intention to hire. And so actually, I think there's loads of things to be positive about, and I think it's really easy for our teams to be drawn into feeling negative because they see high inflation and striking and stuff like that on the news, but actually realizing that because of the peculiarities in the market we're in at the moment and the real candidate shortness, actually this is an opportunity market for us. And so I think we have to address some of those misunderstandings about what's going on with our teams really openly.
So you're talking addressing the language so we can address a stronger mindset within the teams. Dave?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think this is an opportunity as well to revisit and re-engage with our people and remind them about their role in what we as agencies are doing to help boost our own business and continue to capture candidates to grow the economy. We are running our businesses for a purpose. Do all of your staff know what your purpose is? Do they need to be reminded about why you have set up the business and why you are doing what you're doing? And as you remind them of that, that is irrespective of what the challenges are that we face. So revisiting that purpose, which was one of the points that you mentioned at the very beginning, Howard, I think is really vital at this time, because I'm really excited about what's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months. Forget the fact that we know we've got strikes, we've got we show my political leanings here, but we've got two mad people barking at each other, and one of those is going to be our Prime Minister. And I said yesterday we should give it to the recruitment people. We've got a better chance of doing it than they have. But even with all of that, we've got a really good 6 to 12 months to look ahead to and look forward to, particularly with candidates. Really good. So let's remind our people why they're doing it, why it's important, and most importantly, why what they do at the desk between 8:30 or 9 and 5, 6, 7, whenever they finish, why it really matters, what their role is in this, and why it really matters is vital.
Paul?
Yeah, well, I think I'd agree with Dave. We've worked through various recessions over the years. I don't think that we are necessarily heading for a recession. It could be a recessionary climate for several months, but it won't necessarily be a recession, which, as I understand it, 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. So it could be a tougher winter. We know that. But I think Dave's point is very valid. I think there are enormous opportunities available. The attitude has got to be with our people, back to the point that Heather was making. We should have a positive mindset. Our people should have positive mindsets. This is all about, if there is going to be a smaller market, and let's be clear, it's not going to be a tiny market. We're coming from a position presently of 1.3 million vacancies in this country. Even if there is a recessionary climate, that number of opportunities available may diminish, but not to the extent there won't be any. There'll be plenty of jobs to fill, and still a considerable number of people looking for opportunities. So I'm not looking at this situation personally as, disastrous. I don't think it's going to be. It may be tougher, but it won't be as tough as what we've already been through over the last few years. So getting the right mindset, as Heather correctly explained, is very, very important. And I think Dave's right. I think there are phenomenal opportunities coming up for organizations that have the mindset, the willpower to up their game in terms of performance and standards. Because if there are going to be fewer opportunities, and I've already said there won't be a case of no opportunities, but fewer opportunities, you need to perform at a higher level than your competitors. And if you can do that, you can take a greater market share. And there is no reason why people listening today can't start sharpening up their acts over the next 4 or 5 months, preparing for the winter period, making sure they're very close to their clients and candidates, and start to consider what they can do to improve their level of service. And if we are doing that, there's nothing to fear. In fact, I think, as Dave says, exciting times, because you can take your business to new levels by taking business from your competitors.
So this is where we start to talk about that team mentality, isn't it? And we start to think about what we're doing with that team. And I absolutely agree with what all three of you said there regarding it's that terminology and having the right terminology and talking. I don't think there's ever a slowdown. I think I was always saying that there is no such thing as recession for recruiters. You're just a recruiter that can't find a client that's buying, because there are always clients that are buying in recruitment. So you've got to start to find that. So the thing that I would start to think about, if we're talking about the change of that, terminology and what we're doing, we need to get more strategic with our clients and with our meetings. And that was the second thing that the Harvard Business Review came out with. You need to be more strategic with your meetings. So that's your meetings internally. What are they doing? What are you going to get from those meetings? Meeting with your clients externally. What are you trying to get in from your clients during this? And then meeting with your candidates to see what the market actually is like out there and what's going on with the marketplace. So I think that's the first place that I would look at, is be more strategic with the meetings that I'm having, the meetings I'm having with my team, with my clients, and with my candidates, to make sure that we're aligning our business in the areas that are still going to be moving, even if there is a slowdown. And there will be lots of areas that are still moving. So we've got to make sure that we drive ourselves in the right areas rather than just bury our heads in the sand. In my experience, if we start to look at that, leaders fall into those 3 brackets. When there's a period of change looming, they fall into these type of brackets. There's those who do nothing, and we saw lots of those clients through lockdown. Those who hide, and again, we saw lots of those clients who hid during lockdown, and those that take massive action. So why is taking massive action now the only true option if you want to grow and develop your business?
Because it doesn't make sense not to do that. I mean, it's just an obvious thing to make sure you're on top of what needs to happen. The report that the REC produced last week was absolutely brilliant. If you haven't seen it, it's on their website. It's 54 pages. It's a proper analysis of the labour market. And one of the key stats from it was that if we are going to grow our economy by 10%, that requires 1.7 million new jobs. Well, we're the ones that are there to find those jobs and find those candidates. So to your point, Had, if you can't find them in one area, you better take action to find them in another area, because there's more than enough work to go around for most of the companies, both that we're connected to, but also in our sector. the next 6, 12, 24 months are going to be very, very positive for our recruitment sector, despite the challenges that we face. So taking action is absolutely vital. And you gave those stats at the beginning, Howard. I think there were 13. There were 8 from one stat and 5 from the Harvard Business Review. 5 of the 13, nearly 40%, were focused on clients. And I think that's the thing. Sometimes we look internally and say, what do we need to do? And we need to go externally and say, right, what's happening with our client base? Where are our clients going? What are they doing? What are the challenges they face? What's going to happen to them in the next 6, 12 months? And how can I address the challenges they face with the people, the products and the services that I provide?
And actually that REC report, just so everybody knows, it is on the REC website. You don't have to be a member to access it. And it is a really solid piece of research. So if you're looking for something interesting to go and talk to your clients about as a specialist in talent acquisition, honestly, it's a really, really good report to go and get hold of. I can send links if anybody wants to ask me to.
I mean, just come back to the massive action point, and Dave rightly says, why not? I think one of the things to be mindful of, though, is that, and it happens every time, I'm sure people will be nodding their heads, whenever you sit down and you start to make a list of priorities, of things we've got to tackle now, it ends up becoming a lengthy list. There's never a point in anybody's business where everything's working perfectly. There's always a bunch of stuff that needs to be done now. I think be careful, make sure that the priorities that you're putting down on paper, that you're organizing, getting people to deal with, taking ownership of, are not overwhelming. So make certain that we're prioritizing the priorities, and really putting a lot of effort into a small number of things that we're going to do well, rather than trying to spread ourselves across a whole range of actions that we'll only touch and not actually deal with completely. It's a very important thing to do, and making sure that we're focused on those things. We do have time. Let's be clear. We're into July, mid-July nearly. We are in mid-July. What am I talking about? End of July. I'm going crazy. Just having a holiday has done that. We've got August, September, October, probably November. We've got 3 to 4 months to really work very hard to prepare for the winter. Make sure that the actions that we're putting in are things that we can deal with, but make sure that there's a difference in your mindset between the priorities and the urgent things. There's a difference between the two things. Make sure you're working in the priority areas. And I think make sure people are focused and understand what they need to do without being overwhelmed by the amount of things that are needed to be done.
So I think we've got a problem with the chat. I think I've tried to cure it. I've been trying to cure it in the background as people are talking. So I think everyone possibly can enter the chat. If not, please put your questions into the Q&A part. So I think what we're talking about here, we're talking about the traits of high performance teams and growing high performance teams. And I think that's the bit that we've got to start to think about. So that taking massive action, I think we saw through lockdown how many recruitment agencies took no action at all, and some actually hid from that. And I think to me, the bit that was some of the traits that we listed was, have a clear milestone to gauge achievement by. And I think this is where we have to sort of really set the purpose out for the business, and these are the milestones that we're going to achieve, and then define what innovation is needed in the wider organization to actually achieve those milestones, which links back to you, Paul. Is not just make a list of these things I need to do urgently, but these need to be a list of things that we can do that work. So we've got to start to think about that and work that. And that goes back to that work flexibility in order to create demand and meet demand. So if we're more flexible, all there, and this is all about stepping up. And what you're talking about there, Dave and Heather, about reading that REC report, the first thing I thought was 54 pages. Oh my God, that's a massive sort of a conversation stopper for me to go away and read it. But then we go back to the questions that we've been talking about over the last 3 or 4 weeks about data and using data to grow our business. Well, that's packed full of data. It's packed full of information that your clients can use. What a great opportunity to go out and speak to your clients and use that. And that sort of demonstrates, if we get all our business focusing in that direction, that strength of camaraderie, that strength of togetherness, that we're all on the same page, then that's the bit where I think the massive action starts to take place. And if you don't take action, then simply you're either stood still or you're going backwards. So we've got to start to look at that and work from there. So if you were leading a recruitment business now, and you had, say, a number of team leaders, or you were the leader there, would you put your best leader with the lowest performing team or person, or would you put your best leader with the highest performing team or person, and explain why?
That's a tough question.
Well, answer it, Mr. Jacobs.
I'll try and answer it. Go on, Go on, Heather. Heather, you're muted.
Heather's on mute.
Sorry, I had to put it on mute. My neighbour started an angle grinder going in the background, so I'd put myself on mute. I wouldn't do either of those things. I'd train all of my team leaders so that they're all as good as each other, and so that all of them are the best team leaders. But I know that's not the answer you're looking for.
Get off the fence, Heather, because that is never ever going to happen. If you had you know absolute utopia and everyone's at the same skill level, then it would be a simple game, would it be, management and training people? Get off the fence. Get off the fence, HR.
I'll give you a quick answer. Yeah, it's easier to get the best people better than it is to make the slightly less best people better.
That's true.
So if you've got really good team leaders, put them with your best people. And because if you can coach 20% performance out of the people who are already billing really well, that is going to make a much more material difference to your bottom line than getting 20% better out of those that aren't performing. That isn't to say that those that aren't performing don't matter, because clearly they do and they are important. But sometimes I see companies spending a lot of time on the people that are 40, 50, 60% to target, and leaving the really good ones to get on with it because they're really good and they always deliver. And actually, I think that's the wrong way around.
Dave's bang on. I was about to say the same thing. I think you focus, you can make great people brilliant. If you focus on poor performance, you might make them average. So, in difficult times, you really want to focus really hard on your high performers. There is a great question that Heather raises, though. And that is, you've really got to work, and I think we'll get to this shortly, but you do have to make sure that you're developing people at every level, because one thing's for sure, if we're heading for more difficult times, you don't want to be carrying passengers. So that will also come back to recruitment process, who you're bringing in, onboarding, ongoing training and development, and so forth, which of course Heather was alluding to. But there's a blunt answer to your question, Howard, and that is the one that Dave gave, and I think that's correct.
Yeah, and I think it is correct. High-performing manager with your high-performing team will get you far bigger results than putting your high-performing manager with the low-performing team. So it's the same when we start to think about structuring going forward, and this is about taking massive action. How do you increase those mid-players? We'll talk about that a little bit later. How do we increase those mid-players into more high-performing players? Because they can be created, and what are we going to do with that? So, we do quite a lot of training on selling retainers and managing your clients. And we do a whole section on invest, stick, develop, or ditch your clients. If you were heading up a team now or having a team meeting tomorrow, what would you look at from your client base to make sure that your high performing teams are working with your high performing clients?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I've been very involved in with clients recently has been this whole area of examining client base, trying to establish where there's growth opportunity, cross-selling, upselling opportunities, chances to develop retained or exclusive opportunities with businesses, and so forth, that whole trusted advisor piece. And we've talked about the Boston Matrix a great deal to clients. It's very similar to the points you're making here around rising stars, question marks, what are they, dogs and cash cows. So I think you need to analyze your client base, try and establish where there's growth opportunity, and really look very hard at your relationships with those organizations. And your point here, Howard, is are we maximizing our opportunities with our clients? Are we having our best people work with those clients? Are we getting the most out of what we have? And I think anyone listening to this will honestly look at their own client base and come to the conclusion that in virtually 80-90% of occasions, we're not getting that. We're not getting maximum bang for bucks from our clients. And it must be the case because for the most part, we work on a contingent basis, meaning that our clients use several suppliers. And that is clearly not something that any recruitment business is going to want. So I think this point's a valid one. It takes some detailed analysis. And I think the best way to do that is to engage with your people and have them get involved in that whole area of analysis, and then start to work out ownership as to who's going to do what with which clients.
And I think you go back to what we were saying at the very beginning, to Paul's point, about how important we as recruiters are in this market. We matter. We have access to the talent. We are important. So therefore, a way of looking at your clients is which one of your clients or which of your clients value the service that you provide. How do they engage with you? Do they treat you with the respect that you deserve? Do they pay you on time? Do they engage with you appropriately? Do they respond when you say we've got a top class candidate? Do they respond appropriately? Are you dealing with people of influence within your client base? If you can answer or tick all those boxes, then they are very important clients for the next 6 to 12 months because they know that you matter. If you are just one of many and the service you provide is okay from a client point of view, you're just one of many, then I don't think they're valuable clients. They just become clients that you trade with, but they're not A-list clients. And for me, a definition of an A-list client is somebody that really understands the work that you put in, the effort that it takes to find the person, to close them, to get them over the line. If it's a permanent placement, to make sure they do start on the Monday and they stay there for at least the 13 weeks that they're on site. If you've got clients that understand that what you do is valuable, then they are valuable clients.
So I think that, to me, that brings up the two first points that Harvard Business Review brought out. High-performing teams are not afraid to pick up the phone, and high-performing teams are more strategic with their meetings. It's very interesting when you sort of suddenly go into a client, and I remember sat with one client probably about 6 months ago doing this very, very process, breaking down their client base, and they had a huge argument in the meeting, and this was all the sales staff, back office staff, etc., about their biggest client, whether or not they were at loyalty stage, advocacy stage. And it was interesting. The owner of the business thought they were at advocacy stage. Half the sales staff thought they were at trust stage, so not even at loyalty. The back office thought they were all at contact stage. And so when we broke that client down, we were just at acceptance stage. And so we put a plan in place and said, right, what can we do now to get back to where you think you were? Because that's the bit. And what we found was we picked up the phone more to the client. We spoke to more people in the client. We started to understand the client more. We did more strategic meetings with them. And now that client is an exclusive client. It wasn't exclusively before that, but it was their biggest client. But they didn't understand the relationship, and that's that strategic bit, with their client base. And I think we've also got to think that as managers, do we understand our relationship with our billers? Are we picking up the phone to our billers and talking to our billers more metaphorically? Are we just speaking to them more and helping them design? Are we having more strategic meetings with them, training, developing, helping them advance themselves within that business? So to me, that part, the view of, what are we doing, is really important, that we start to think, if I was in a team meeting tomorrow, these are the things I'd be looking to understand. I want to know which clients I want to stick, ditch, and develop. But then I've got to think about that for a purpose about where do I spend my time and what do I do that? And that has to be a strategy within the business and not something that we just fall on by chance.
And how my big bugbear, which I've bored people with for the last 2 years, when we talk about clients, we always put a name to the client. But actually, for most companies, a client is an individual person that we have a relationship with on a client side. So we do really well at Barclays. Actually turns out we do really well with Marie Smith, who works in one division of Barclays, but there's 100 other people that don't even know who we are.
Yeah, I've just interviewed a candidate for a client, and I said, tell me your biggest client that you opened up. And he was quite open and said, oh, it was Deloitte's. And when I said, and how many people did you place into Deloitte's? He said, one. And I went, but you said that was your biggest client. He said, well, Deloitte's are huge. but it only made one person. I said, nice play on words, but you've got to think about what you're saying there. And that's it. You know, you've got to start to think about who are your big clients. So, you know, if we think about this, lots of business when it comes to hard times instantly shed the poor performers or the newest recruits from the business. They sometimes then build in massive KPIs and create this culture of fear. Lockdown demonstrated this hugely in some agencies, and a lot of agencies suddenly found that they didn't have enough staff to cope. What's your advice now on staffing levels within your business or within a business, okay, as we start to move into the next economic cycle?
Oh, and Howard, I'm a little bit hard on this one. Get rid of your poor performers on Monday. Why are they sitting here now on Wednesday? What are you waiting for? If you can genuinely say that you've put in the effort to make those people better, that you have good leaders who have also made those people better, and they are not performing, they should be there. And I know it's really tough to get hold of good recruiters. I accept that. I know that, because we've got plenty of clients who are struggling to find good people. But just because there's an absence of good people doesn't mean that you should keep poor people. If you've done all you can and you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I've done the best I can with my team, then they shouldn't be there.
And I think that's the big if, though, Dave, isn't it? It's the if you've done everything that you can.
Yes.
So I think, you know, the important thing for me is not to knee-jerk any of your decisions. So be sure that you have done everything you can, because I've seen some in bigger organizations, rarely in small ones, in the bigger ones, appalling short-termism, where they have not given somebody a fair shot and they've not given them the support and training, but then suddenly someone comes along and says, oh, we've got a downturn and we're going to make some knee-jerk decisions based on the spreadsheet, and you know, those are very poor. So I agree in the context of what you're saying. If somebody genuinely is a poor performer, absolutely, why are you hanging on to them? But it's that not knee-jerking that decision.
Yeah, fair point.
I think you're absolutely right. But it is that point that you've got to look at your ongoing training and development, learning and development, the support you provide to people. And you have, as Dave says, you've got to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, have we actually done everything we conceivably can do to assist and support this person, to help them to be the person we thought they were going to be when we took them on? And if the answer's yes, there's literally nothing else we could do here, they're just not up to the job, then you're right. We need to make that tough decision. But I think that's, as Heather says, something that it can't be black and white. We have to be very clear. And by the way, when we talk about this from a company perspective, it's really important that we recognize, as a bit like you were saying earlier about knowing an individual in the business. It's not just the job of if you have the pleasure of having a training professional in your business, a coach, a lead, somebody that is L&D, great, but it's not that person's job entirely to be doing the onboarding and ongoing training. You have to look at the individuals that the people who are poor performing report into, and be looking at what they're doing to assist and support the people that report into them. Those are the things that need to be looked at on a daily, weekly basis. One thing I think is very important, and I do think, to Heather's point, whatever happens, whatever which way we go, it's important not to panic. It's important to think calmly about what's happening. Prepare in advance. That's part of this point, is prepare in advance. Look at your team. Look at what you're doing to support them. Look at the training you're providing. Are we doing the right things by people? But it's also about not panicking. The people did shed, a lot of people, I remember very clearly, as we all do, as we hit that horrible moment when Boris said we had to stay indoors. I've received and was witness to all sorts of panic conversations and some really crazy decisions, I thought, not from my clients, but what I was hearing on the grapevine from larger corporations, which I thought were appalling, quite frankly, at that moment. Weeks later, there was support for staff, for companies coming through from government after companies had made decisions to shed a huge load of people. Well, I think we have to be very careful not to panic, to be very sensible about things.
So I think the comment is here, and you're right about what lockdown did. And what it did was, if you start to go through that traits of high performing teams, demonstrates a sense of camaraderie and togetherness. So if you've got those outliers that are being negative, you've got those outliers that are being, what we said absolutely point blankly on the REC meetings and on the REC webinars and on our webinars, if you have internal terrorists, that are going to chip away at your infrastructure of your business, well, they're not demonstrating a sense of camaraderie or togetherness, and that's the bit where you start to think, you want to think, if you're in a corner, you want all your people facing in the right direction. You want everyone doing the right things for that. So I think when we start to think about our staffing levels, it's not just about who's a good performer, who's a bad performer. It's who looks after the business for you, who will help the business, who will stand up and fight for the business. And I think that's when you start to understand people. And that doesn't matter whether they could be just a below average performer, they could be an average performer, they could be a star performer. Are they absolutely in the trenches with you if some things do turn bad? Because it's very easy to run a business when the market is booming. It's harder when the market starts to reduce. And therefore, you need the workforce around you. And that's part of that high performance team. Everyone has got each other's back. Everyone is trying to perform each other. And we as we move on to the last question, managers sometimes view their staff in those brackets: not performing, average performing, and star performing. We know stars will weather the storm, but whether they're the right storm to have in your business is a other thing. But how do you get your mid to lower performers to step up if they are that right person in the organization, that person that demonstrates camaraderie, togetherness, and loves the business and will do anything to help the business? How do you get them to step up? How do you help them to step up?
I think that's a really great question, because too often in difficult times, we are overly reliant on our star performers to get us through those difficult times. And I actually think, although we said earlier, you have your best leaders managing your best people, whichever business we're involved in, typically your top performers constitute 20%, maybe 30% of your staff. It's not everybody. They're called star performers for a reason. So this issue of working really hard with the new people coming into your company and your middle performers to get them to step up another gear or two is vital. And I think that does come down to constant training, learning and development. But I think a lot of that focus, and I alluded to this point a moment ago, is making sure their leaders, their managers, are being better trained by you, in a sense, than that we're training the guys that report into them. Because it's one thing to train people and do a great job in that training, but then you give them back to the care of the people managing them. And if those people are not attuned to what you've trained these people to do, all the training you've put in just disappears. Nothing happens. So you have to focus really hard on the leaders, the people that manage those middle to low performers. Make sure you get them to improve the methods that they use to support and train and develop their people. That's where the big focus should be.
Heather?
And go back.
I couldn't agree more. Paul, you could have been channeling what I would have said on it.
There you go.
There's a little bit I'd add to that alludes to what we talked about earlier, which is it's much better to focus on your average performers and move them forward than to focus on your not performers. Because as Dave said, if you're not performers, why they're there. But it's all about making sure your managers are behaving as appropriate at-desk coaches, that they understand how to move that performance, that they're given the relevant amount of attention, and they understand what it is in your business that moves the dial on performance. It's doing the day job properly as a manager.
Exactly.
I think, again, if you go back to those 5 points from the Harvard Business Review, the last 2 points was high performing teams give and receive appreciation more frequently. And it's what do we give and receive from an appreciation, whether that be monetary, whether that be a word in someone's ear, whether that be a pat on someone's back, whether it be whatever it be from there. And it's about that working as an authentic team. And therefore, if you are trying to develop a business, we go back to that point when we said hit lockdown. Train your team. You've got a great time now to train and upskill your team. Upskill. And the more you upskill your team now, irrespective whether the market goes up stays the same or goes down, the better that team will perform. The more you appreciate that team, the more you give them that appreciation and show your appreciation, the more they'll do that with each other. And guess what? The more they'll do that with their clients as well. So to me, it's a sort of a multi-branded sort of approach about, to get your mid-performers to step up, you have to train them and develop them, but you have to appreciate them. You have to absolutely appreciate them to be there. So therefore, if you're going to say something, you have to do it. And that's the type of thing that it requires when we start to change markets. And the economic cycle is always changing. So it's always going to go up, down, left, right, etc., etc. And we have to counterbalance that, because we get to that point where we are doing the same over and over again, and we have to regenerate and reinvigorate our business constantly. And that means changing slight things and moving things for marginal gains to pull the business forward. So to me, I would start with appreciating who those people are, and then looking at how I can develop them and step them up, and them to understand why we are doing that. Dave? Is Dave still with us?
I'm still here. So, the one thing I was going to say is, remember, we also have a different working environment right now. Many of our people are working from home. So when we talk about being more authentic at work, give and receive appreciation more freely, make sure that your team leaders understand that there is a balance in culture and behavior when you have a disparate team, where some companies, all their staff are in all the time. Some companies are in 2 or 3 days a week. Then you have days like today when there's a train strike and people are back at home again. The dynamic of the working environment for most of our recruiters has changed, and probably isn't going to go back to what it was like 2 or 3 years ago. So that means the way that you give feedback, the way that you behave, the way that you manage, the way that you coach better performance also has to be different. If you're running your business the same as you were in February 2020, and you're running it the same today, then maybe there's some questions you've got to have to how you get better performance from those people. And it's down to leadership and the leaders that lead your people.
Well, I think we've sort of covered that topic, and it's an interesting topic when we talk about high-performing teams. We're talking about the actual behavioural, cultural set of that team, and then what we can add to it. And that's a really interesting sort of view when we start to look at the dynamics of businesses, is that, we are often here to say we hire on skills and fire on behaviors, but if we hire the right people behaviorally and then train them, we'll get far more out of those people. And that leads nicely into the segue into next week's webinar, which is building a rookie production line, how not to waste money on one. Is it your people, your process that's broken? Do your rookies pay for themselves within the first 13 weeks? And is your onboarding killing learning? And I think next week will be really interesting, because I think we still should be taking people on at this moment in time, because the actual volume of work out there is going to slow down, but not enough to say we have to shed people. I generally think that we should be looking to bring people in that can help us develop and move our business forward. And we've got a 6-month window before we hit 2003. If we can get those people up to speed within those 6 months, then 2003 could be a really productive year for us, irrespective of what the market's doing.
We've just lost 20 years.
Yeah, I was going to say 2003.
Oh, 2023. It's been a long day, Paul, and you've been away, and no one else has been away. And, Well, ladies and gents, but before we carry on taking the Michael out of Paul, it's time to disappear, because it is now the 1:45 the hour. So thanks again for your participation, Paul, Heather, Hannah, Dave. Thank you for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you all next week.
See you guys. Bye.
See you guys.
Bye.
Have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye.